Hello.
Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Um, I guess I had a question on the apprenticeship.
Yes.
I mean, suppose I already have some work experience, but I'm switching careers. Is that still something?
Yeah, that's what we geared the apprenticeship for everybody, not necessarily somebody that coming out of high school or anything. The majority of the students, are adult students, so most of them have worked in different area, like could be management, could be warehouse, could be different things. So what we want to do is we want to be able to build the apprenticeship so that way the the students can get the experience while they're in school, because we find that the IT industry require decent experience to really get a solid career with good money. um, so we spoke with the employers yesterday. I met with them yesterday, and there were about 4 or 5 employers that are highly interested. What they want is they want the students to have at least some course like this, and then some course with networking and security. So if you obtain a non-credit certificate, what we can do is we can look into, different companies that would accommodate the students with credit and non-credit. Some companies, they want the students to have, most companies, they want the students to have at least 2, 3 courses in the CIS or the IT area before they start them. Only because, they want you to have at least some technical knowledge. So when they go through the training, they want to make sure that you understand what they're talking about. And some of the employers are City of Moreno Valley, Riverside County, that will be related to hospital and some of their, it could be, a lot of it is hospital, and then some of it would be, county related, where they deal with, different aspect of district and so forth. And then the other employers are Loma Linda Hospital. So Loma Linda University, I met with them, and they expressed interest in hiring IT and eventually moved those students into security areas. So in security, a lot of the times we start in IT so that way we have a solid technical foundation and then be able to do that. Okay.
What about the Python companies?
Yeah, so City also expressed interest in hiring student programming students for Python because they have developers that are retiring. So as you know, a lot of people who work for government or public entity, they work there for a long time because the benefits are good and the salaries is good. So, um, you know, yeah, if you're interested in that, we're building the programming track.
And that's all starting in spring.
Yeah, we want to launch a few companies in spring as far as the apprenticeship goes. And then there, originally we had a list of 15, but because of COVID, some company decided to put a pause on things before, in IT for dealing with COVID is that people transition to remote and there's a lot of technical requirement. So they have intensely amount of work that they have to deal with. So right now, um, I we're looking to really build with a few companies, and then we would expand out to about 15. Okay. So we were talking about apprenticeship. I posted an announcement in the course. So let me pin the interpreter so that way that can help the student. Because let me get. Okay. Do you have any other questions before we start?
Oh, yes. Can you say what area you prefer on the Google form?
I will have Jennifer McDaniel fix that.
Oh, I
Okay.
was just curious. It's not
Yeah, she's not. She didn't put everything on there, but I will have her fix that for you. So, and we will put the course information.
And can you put down that you prefer remote only?
Some companies, when you work in a hospital environment, that might not just be remote. So some companies have told us that even with COVID, they have to have, you know, requirements for some on-site because you have to service machines there. So yeah. 1 second, let me get the spotlight for Zoom set. Yeah, so we'll fix the form, but right now I think she only wants the interest to be completed, and then we will have more flyers and training.
So at this time, you don't require the resume, you're just looking for the interest, people that are interested in?
Yeah, and then I think, if you have a resume, you can upload it. Okay. So let's see. Chat participants. So I will put Hannah on and then Katie on for interpretation. Are there any other questions? Yeah, for some reason I'm not able to pin two things on Zoom. I don't know why it's too. Oh, let me fix that. Yeah, I think they updated Zoom for the interpreter. I'm unable to pin two on Zoom. So let me see. So when you switch, I guess I just have to flip the spotlight video. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how that was what we were last told on the most recent update. Just switching.
Yeah, last week I was able to pin both of you, and then this week I'm not.
I think if you make one of us like the co-host too, like we can do the switch.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that instant. So let me get you guys to be co-hosts. So yes, and then okay. All right, so I added you as co-host.
Okay, awesome. Let's see how that works.
Thank you. All right, so let's get started. Sorry about the delay. As I was mentioning, I posted the apprenticeship information on announcement. If you're interested, please fill out the Google form. And with it, you can add your resume and your information. Jennifer McDaniel is the director for apprenticeship, and she will be working with all of you, whoever's interested, to get your apprenticeship started in spring. Okay, and we'll talk more about that. I will have the flyers ready in the next week or so. So this is week 3. We have one more week until we complete this course. I'd like for you to check your grade. If you have anything missing, please make sure that we submit the assignment on Canvas. Okay. I will go into screen share. If you have any questions, please unmute and ask. I will check the chat periodically, but if you ask verbally, we'll be fast. Okay, so we had left off with week 2 materials. We didn't finish that, so I like to finish it, and then I will go into week 3. So we had left off with the assignments on week 2. And if you like to finish it now, we can go through it together for the last part. Because as you learn about troubleshooting this week, we need to understand how to work with hard drives, and there's a huge portion for hard drives information. So I believe we left off with number 21 in Unit 2 in class assignment. So if you like to open that, we can take a look. So in when you set up the hardware, what happens is you will have to tell the system, or the system has to recognize the hardware and the components. Now on the more modern current system, it would use Uefi instead of BIOS. Now on Windows 10, you can access Uefi with the power options. But in most cases, if you're looking at older computer, we would use BIOS by pressing a function key depending on the model of your motherboard, and to be able to check and see if the components is recognized. If not, you have to manually configure in BIOS. BIOS stands for basic input output setup. So we want to make sure that the system recognizes the components. So for 22, it asks you what's the purpose of Uefi. Basically, it's going to contain the connected components information, which is your drive, your video adapter, RAM, motherboard information. It would have the model. And so all your hardware components need to be recognized by the system, or you have to manually configure it. So what we need to check the connection of the components. We can use it to test devices, especially if you're working with processor, as we did last week with CPU-Z, but we can also use Uefi to check the setup for your processor. We can look into checking error and also set up your boot. So on your hard drive, you can have different sections of your hard drive to contain OSs or one OS, and we can have certain partition or the section of the drive to be boot. So for 22, we simply put the information there, check connection for components, test devices, check error, and set up boot. For 23, we want to highlight the few important points about CPU compatibility, and you can also find this in notes. So we talk about how we need to make sure that there is compatibility between the CPU and the motherboard. So first, we want to look at the CPU factor. The form factor is going to be the size, the physical size, how it's going to fit onto the board. The socket on the motherboard is where we would connect the CPU, so make sure that you use the proper socket. And if you're using Intel, it uses LGA, and if you're using AMD, it could use some of the newer one would be AM4 or AM3 plus. Now, graphic features, we want to make sure that some CPU would have graphic features. That mean that it would have built-in graphic capability. The cache size is important because that's going to give you a little bit more performance capability. And also bit sizes, where that would work with different software, like your operating system. So these are the important points when you're looking into replacing your CPU or buying a new CPU. And I have a video that's going to come up on YouTube in a couple of days for building a PC. I've been working on it since early this morning, so I will show you where I'm at right now. I just seek the motherboard. So I will include that in your Canvas. Okay, any questions so far? Now, some of the things that we want to talk about is how when we install the processor, we want to make sure that the pins are aligned properly. We talked about how the gold triangle points to pin 1, and you want to align that with the socket. Also, we want to talk about the heatsink. I think we left off last week where we talked about vertically mounted heatsink is when it sends air up from the bottom to the case fan, and then the horizontally mounted heatsink, it's going to circulate it sideways to the side fans. Okay. And the differences in heatsink would be active and passive. And when you see a fan attached to the heatsink, that would be an active. And if there's no fan with just the metal fins, that will be passive. And if you have a Raspberry Pi comes with passive heatsink, and for the active heatsink, you would often see that in computer or even laptop. So we talked about using thermal paste. And with the thermal paste, that is a way that we can insulate the processor so it will keep it cool. And it also acts as an adhesive level between the heatsink and the processor. So we talked about Arctic Silver in the last couple of weeks, but you can buy other brands. All you need is a pea size, and you want to spread it evenly on the processor if it's not already there. Sometimes manufacturer would include the thermal paste on top of the processor. Okay, any questions? So what we have is from week 2. You can also find that in the notes, and let me point out the page for you. So heatsink information is here on page 67 of the 91 pages. I know it's a lot, but hardware is always a lot of information. And then prior to that, 65 to 66, you would see processor. Okay. So now let's get into the liquid cooling, because I know some of you would be interested in installing liquid cool system. So instead of using fan-based cooling, we can use liquid cooling system, which also consists of a fan. So this is a way that we can cool the processor. And the thing that you need to be concerned about is that the tubing that goes into the liquid cooling unit, make sure you don't break the tubing, otherwise it would leak and it would destroy your motherboard and other components. So it uses a form of liquid to circulate, and it would absorb the heat and take the heat and use the fan to bring the heat away from the processor. Some people actually customize their liquid cool unit, but you often see that they sell a unit out of the box ready to install, and on average you would find them close to $100. So if you are building a system or you're using the system for gaming or high processing tasks, you want to make sure that you use something that will cool the system appropriately. I prefer fan cool because, and also open air system, meaning that it's using no case with just the backbone grounded metal. And you find some of these now, some of them are also glass. I have colleagues that install their computer into the wall. So you have many ways to customize your PC or your desktop PC. So that way it would look cool. There are tutorial video on how to make a table desktop, meaning that you would take a glass table and you would build in this PC component. So that way you can use the table as your computer. So that's really cool. Next, we're going to talk about expansion cards. Many times that you would see people add video adapter so that way they can have better graphics for video, to watch video or create video or capture video. So here it shows you how to install a video adapter, and I will also have my tutorial video up that will include this part. I bought a video card. So this is the one that's going to go into the PC. It's a Sapphire. It's about $200, so it's not a super high-end video adapter, but it does have 8 gig in video RAM. So when you purchase video card, you want to make sure that it's compatible with the bus or the slot, meaning that where it's going to plug in. So the gold pins right here is where we would plug in. Also how it's going to interface with your monitor or your screen. Now, most of the video adapter would have its own power connection because it requires additional power. So make sure that you have enough power supply for it. And we want to have a video adapter that has a decent amount of video RAM. So it doesn't use the RAM module that's in the system. So it uses its own separate memory. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Importantly, when you install the video adapter, make sure you check your BIOS or your Uefi. Make sure that it's recognized there. Second, we want to install video driver, which you can obtain from the manufacturer. If it doesn't come with a USB or a DVD, you can download it and put it on a USB so you can install it using the operating system. So as we screen share, I'm going to show you that real quick. So on Windows 10 environment, you can use things like Device Manager. And Device Manager, we simply search it by inputting the word Device Manager in the Windows search bar. This is what it would look like. And it would list all the components that are in the system. So here, what you would see is I have information about my processor. I'm using my laptop, so it won't see a separate monitor. But what you can see is if you have any additional adapter or expansion card, that's what they're called, you would find that here. Okay, even with drives, right? And so when we update video, so let's say this is my video adapter, what we can do is we can right click the device and we simply choose update driver or install driver. Now automatically Windows will try to configure the driver based on Microsoft library. However, if you want better graphics, you should run the software, which is the driver for the adapter. Okay, and I simply search for Device Manager. So after you install your operating system, you need to install chipset driver which is for your motherboard. And some motherboard have video built in and audio built in. Second, we want to install any expansion card driver so that way it will properly work and it will have all the features that are incorporated in that expansion card. So in the current market, you would see PCI Express, which we talked about last time. So with the PCI Express, I'm going to switch camera real quick so I can show you my new motherboard. With the PCI Express, what you have is you would have a specific slot. So this is the new motherboard that I installed. Okay. And as you can see here, these two slots right here are the PCI Express. Let me angle it so that way it can show. Okay. So the clip that would clip the expansion card in. So on this MSI motherboard, you have two slots for expansion card, like audio or video. Okay. And it has its own M.2 for the drive, and the processor would go here, as it would have the lever here. That's called the ZIF, Z-I-F, for zero insertion force. So once we seat the processor, we simply push the lever down to lock it in place. Here's your RAM slots. Okay. And then all the ports are located over here. So this is a simple board, but you would find other boards that are a little bit more fancy. Any question? Okay, so let me get back to screen share here. Okay. So we touched on heatsink, we touched on expansion. Now, the good characteristic of a good graphic adapter, we want processor speed, so it has its own processor. And often people would refer to your graphic card processor as GPU. So that will be your graphic processing unit. And it would have a decent amount of video RAM or storage. So now the current one, I think, is a DDR5 going into DDR6. I see some DDR6 available. It should have a good size in cache. That's basically for swapping, and also when you use 3D, cache and storage is important. Also interface connection to your monitor or your screen, and also for cooling, which is fan. So these are the things that we need to look for when we upgrade or we purchase new video adapter for our computer. And you can even add one for laptop. You just have to find one that would fit your laptop form factor. Okay. So I mentioned why we need to install video adapter. So we would have proper resolution, especially when you're dealing with game. If you're buying a video adapter for game, and if you're running your 4K game, that will give you the proper resolution. Then we would also have additional features to control the GPU, where it would give you the software tool to also manage your video adapter. Now with the plug and play devices, which would be your USB, keep in mind that your notes shows you how you can uninstall video adapter and then install new ones. So it shows you step by step with pictures. Okay. So let's talk about external USB devices. So external USB devices could be your flash drive, or it could be your audio sound cards, your Wi-Fi adapter, and with Wi-Fi you would have an antenna. Now, normally we would have plug and play, so out of the box, when you plug it into the USB, it would run the firmware. Now, if you want additional configuration, right, you can use Control Panel in Windows or the settings that you need to set up for your system. Here it talks about how you can configure sound card on Windows and Mac OS. Okay. The old Apple, you can add in some components, but the new one, they make it a little bit more challenging to replace or add components. And make sure you check the warranty. Okay. And there's configuration for Linux. So one of the things in the past on the old computers that it doesn't have a network adapter, which is your Ethernet adapter where you would plug in, your Ethernet cable. But on the more modern computer, you would see that that's already included in your motherboard. So there's a way that we can also add adapter. Now keep in mind that servers would use multiple connections. So when you work on servers, sometimes you have to add a new network adapter because that way we can control different type of traffic, and we would have multiple connections. So here it gives you some additional information on how to install adapter. Now on the Gen 2 USB, you should usually have throughput about 10 gigabit per second. And often if you're looking at the numbers that's represented with the base, the front number here, like the 1000, it represents the speed. Okay? And then the base T, it represents the type of copper connection that it's designed to use. So when we say base T, that means that it uses twisted pair copper, which is what you often find in your Ethernet cable. And if you take my network class, we will go more in depth with that. Okay? So here it shows you how you can install with the USB device. Let's talk about SATA. This is important. Now, we would use in general different type of SATA drive, and even on the SSD hybrid like this one, okay, you would have the SATA connection, and we mentioned that it needs the data and the cable last time. eSATA uses for external drive, not external USB, but external SATA drive. And sometimes you can buy these to have additional storage outside. And it tells you the speed and the version there. So the latest is SATA 3. Okay, 6 gigabit per second. Okay. So for 29, it asks you how do you install a plug-and-play USB wireless adapter. You should install the drivers before connecting the USB adapter. Now, in most cases, when we connect, it's going to launch the firmware. But when we do this, what that will do is it will not use the operating system generic driver. And that will give you a little bit more feature and capability with that device. Okay. questions, you can always go to the manufacturer website to download your driver. So for 30, let's go through and look at this. I emphasize this because I want to make sure students know what they are and how to use it. Okay? So for number 30, you're going to look at the picture and you're going to identify the connector. If you ever use a floppy drive, you've seen this before, but this is for fan, right? Or it could be for small drives. So the type of connector, number one, it is an ATX Molex Mini. Okay, a Molex Mini is smaller than a regular Molex. Sometimes it could be called a Berg connector, B-E-R-G. It has 4 pins and it used to distribute power to the components like a fan or a drive. So the black or the brown wire is used for grounding. All electrical components need to have a ground to make sure that it's safe and it's not going to be shorted. The yellow wire, which is number 3, that's for positive 12 volts. This 12 volts is needed to mechanically move components in a drive or sometime other devices. Number 4 is the red wire, and that is positive 5 volt. Most of your simple, smaller components uses 5 volts in the computer. Now, when you're looking at microboard like Raspberry Pi or Arduino, it does not exceed 7 volts. So most of the components need to be attached either 5 volts or 3 volts. On the PC motherboard, it needs additional voltage to either mechanically move, flatter on drives, or move the mechanism for a drive. So you often see that it needs higher than 5 volts. Okay. So if you study for A+, CompTIA A+ certification, you gotta know the type of connector and the wires and how they're used. Okay. So as you look at the chart in the note, you would see that SATA that has to speed up 6 gigabit per second is your SATA 3. This is currently in the market. The cable that's used for SATA is also rated, so make sure you use the proper SATA rate or the SATA class cable for the drive. Otherwise, you're going to limit the performance of that drive, even though it fits. Now, if you're using external drive, that will be your eSATA 3. And that would also transfer at 6 gigabit per second. You can only have 1 cable per drive. So the cable that's used, I'm going to open one that I just, sometimes cables will come with motherboards, sometimes they don't, depending on the manufacturer. So here's the cable, and you notice that there's a metal clip. Okay, that just allows us to secure it onto the drive, and you notice there's an L shape. So we want to align the shape to the connection which is in the back of the drive. So when you open your drive, you would see the L shape and make sure that you match it up. So this is a data cable, and the drive would also need a power cable which is larger. Okay. So as you can see, there's only one end of this to the drive, and the other end of this to the motherboard. It doesn't matter which one. Sometimes you would use an angle cable so that way you can make the connection a little bit more neat. But what we have is we only have one connector to one drive and one end to the motherboard. Okay, so you cannot connect more than 2 drives per cable. So no, only one drive can connect to one cable, and that the other end is to the motherboard for number 32. Any question? So many acronyms, right? So in computer world, we use a lot of acronyms, so you have to be familiarized with acronyms, as people would refer to, you know, different class of interface. Okay, so let's talk about SATA Express, which is SATA E, different than eSATA. SATA Express is also in the market. This is revision 3.2. It is faster than your SATA 3. It can go up to 16 gigabit per second, so it's 10 gigabit per second faster than your SATA 3. Now, you can create it where it's hot swapping. So when we say hot swapping, means that the computer can be on and we can unplug the drive and plug in another drive, and it automatically configures. You see this a lot with servers. Now, technically, regular PC, we don't do hot swapping. We want to shut it off, ground it, and then take it out. However, if you have the need, let's say that you run a small business from home, then you would build the system to accommodate that. Like you can run your website from your home system or your home server. And SATA Express is also used for RAID mode, which where we can group up multiple drives to be able to create backups or, you know, multiple images of a certain type of system. Okay. Any question? So this is part of week 2, and I want to finish it up because it has a lot of really important information. So in case you have questions, you can ask. So in the assignment number 34, it asks, if Lily wants to set up a SATA drive for her PC as hot swapping drives, what should Lily do? We want to configure the drive for HCI mode in BIOS or UEFI. So if you're using BIOS, you can boot to BIOS, and then in it, you're going to go into the basic setup, select the drive, and then you would enable, and you would use your keyboard in BIOS only. Some BIOS version will allow mouse, like the Dells, but in most cases, you would use keyboard. Now, UEFI, we would be able to access that from Windows Power Options. So we would go into the menu or the drop-down menu and then be able to select that. But we want to point to AHCI mode for that drive, so that way we can hot swap. Okay.
Can I see 33 real quick?
Sure.
Up to 16. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so your Express is 16 gigabit per second for SATA. Now, it all depends on how much we want to spend, right? What kind of data we use the drive for or the device for. So, you know, before you make a purchase or upgrade, you think about the use of the system, right? The compatibility And then also we consider cost and availability as well. Now, most companies would make sure that their system lasts for 3 to 5 years. So you have to think about how it would scale out for usage over years. Okay. All right. Let's touch on peripherals. So when we say peripherals, we mean that there would be other systems or components that will be added or attached to our computer. For it could be projection, it could be printing. So one of the common peripherals is your printer. Most of company would hire a technician to service printer because it tends to break due to wear and tear. If you're using the book in chapter 5, it spends a great amount of time on how to troubleshoot printer. And I removed that portion for this particular class because there are other areas that we need to address. But if you're studying for CompTIA A+, you need to know how to troubleshoot printer step by step. Okay. We would also use scanners, or sometimes all 3-in-1 or multiple feature in one, like printer, scanner, and fax all together. And your ADF scanners are sheet fed. Some of the copiers does this too. So, or you would have a flatbed scanner where you would have a glass surface, and then you would use that glass surface to scan your document. Now, printers can come in different form. It could come in receipt printers. That's what you see at sales terminal, which is a computer that's attached to a small printer. And those type of printers are thermal printers. So it uses heat to lay down the text on a glossy paper. Sometimes we would use barcode or QR scanners, and you would see these at stores. So it will be able to read barcode and QRs. So then another peripheral would be your monitor or your screen. Then we also have VR headsets, right? Like the Oculus Rift or other form of VR. So the VR would be attached to our system. So that way we can use 3D, or we can look at 3D image through the headset. Peripheral could be optical drives like CD, DVD, Blu-ray. That could be via USB or SATA, right? Depend, but if it's external, that will be USB. Peripherals could be mouse, and now we have wireless or wired. Okay. In addition to that will be a keyboard. That could be touch pads, drawing pads. There's so many things that we can add to the computer to increase the functionality of it. So beside the printer and the monitor, 3 additional peripherals. We can have VR headsets, barcode scanner, we can have speakers so we can get sound, microphone so we can record voice, mouse so we can click and control through interface, keyboard so we can type, optical drive so we can read optical media like CD, DVD, and Blu-ray, or we can write to those media. And then we can use it for projection. So projector is another peripheral, and you see this a lot in, conference places, or even school, right? Businesses. Now, in a lot of the conferences, they hire technicians to come in and put all the cables in for networking, the Wi-Fi into the hall, and even projection screen. So if you become a service technician, that sometimes you will have to do that to service these peripherals. Okay. Any question? Okay, so I just need you to identify 3. You don't have to put more than 3 if you don't want to. Now, another way that we can adapt, right, 2 computers to one single keyboard and one display, and you see this as data center, where we would have many systems, many servers, but we would only have one keyboard and one monitor. So that way we can switch from one computer to the next and be able to control the computers. This is called the Kvm Switch. And basically KVM stands for what? Keyboard, video, and mouse. Okay. So it's keyboard, display, and mouse functionality for multiple systems using one. I don't have it with me. I left it in my office, but usually you can buy a KVM switch. They come in various sizes, some small, some large. That way you can plug in, and they would have USB port and then also display ports for your monitor. So you would connect that switch to the systems, right? And then to be able to utilize it. So you would often see that. Okay. Another peripheral I forgot to mention is your game controller, right? Or your webcam, your camera. So there's so many different devices that we can attach to our system. Okay. And you can find that starting on page 82 or 80. KVM switch is on page 84 if you want to read more about it. And they're not that expensive. And also the quality too, you want one that would last for a long time. So we want to make sure that we research the type of switch that we would use. In some cases, we would have magnetic reader, like for your card, or your chip reader, like at point of sale system, you see that when you make a payment, right? Or sometimes it would have the NFC, so you can do Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or digital wallet type of payment. Okay. All right, let's talk about power supply. This is a very essential area as far as upgrading, troubleshooting. So the job of a power supply is to convert power from high voltage AC to low voltage DC, so that way we can plug things into our outlet. So I just pulled this earlier from the case. It came with the power supply, and as you can see, it comes with different color wire that's attached. Now on here, these are the connectors, okay? The large connector, this one, it has a clip. This one goes to the motherboard, okay? And this is the ATX power supply. So depending on the form factor, right, of your case, your motherboard, that then you would also choose the power supply. This is a regular Molex. This often goes to drives, or sometimes in some cases fans, larger fans would use these, but they often use the smaller one. Okay. We already talked about bird. So bird. Okay. And then here is the fan for the motherboard fan here. Okay. So now each of these, the way it's designed is you can't really plug them in backwards. They have the proper clip and the proper connector type, so you plug it in the way that it would be design. So it's really difficult to switch it around. So make sure that you check the connector, and then that's how you will plug it into the device of the motherboard. Okay. Now on the power supply, you would have a sticker like this. And on the sticker, it would tell you, right, the load for the voltage. Okay. And some sticker, it will tell you the type, the color of the wire and what they're rated at. Usually it will tell you the form factor. So this one, right, is for serial ATA and also ATX. And then it also tells you the wattage. So this one is only 330 watts. It came with my case. So I had upgraded and I bought a larger power supply to be able to accommodate my processor, my motherboard, my drives, and all the other components, my video adapter. Okay, so 330 on an older system is fine, but on the newer processor, newer board, and other components, that will be short. So we want to go with something higher. So the purpose of the power supply mainly is to convert, right, from AC to DC. And on the laptop, right, you would have that with the adapter, so that way it would charge your battery because your laptop uses the battery as its power source. So the range, for the voltage range for the dual voltage power supply, it supports 115 to 120 volts at 60 hertz. On the other end, it also goes from 220 to 240 volts at 50 hertz. So we get a little bit higher in the voltage with the lower frequency, where we would have lower in the voltage with the higher frequency. So this is the range. These are the ranges for the dual voltage power supply. Now, one of the things I want to mention is in the back of the power supply, there's a little red knob, or the little glide, and it would tell you, right, the rated voltage for that power supply. For North America, we want to use 115. Okay. For other part of the world, because the way that the power is converted through the inverter for the homes, then we want to use the other mode. So you can simply slide it over to change it if you are somewhere else outside of North America. So on the next question, it addressed that. The difference between the North American and the European ratings. So North American ratings is 115, and that's within the first range. The European ratings is 230 volts, and that's in the second range. So most of the time, manufacturer will make it where it's adaptable to different part of the world. So when you buy power supply here, it automatically have the 115 rated for the voltage. So you don't have to make adjustment, but make sure you check, right, when you install it, and so that way you don't supply more voltage to your system than needed. Okay. Any questions? So we went over these already. Let me move up so you can see the previous question. You can type down your answers. You can find this in the notes. So for one, this is a 12 volt secondary, and secondary means that it goes to components, drives, etc., other than the motherboard. Okay. Number two, this is an AUX secondary. This is a different form factor. So most of the time you would see ATX for ATX case, right? ATX motherboard, so you would see these. Okay. Now the second one is the AUX secondary. Now ATX also have different pin sizes depending on the motherboard. So for the motherboard connector, this is called the ATX primary 20 pin, which is smaller than the 24 pin. And if you want to check, make sure, right, you can also count the pin, but so that's the connector, right? And then for the primary, you often see it has a large clip, so that way you would insert the proper way and you would align the clip with the motherboard slot for the clip. Okay, any question? So when you replace the power supply, these are some of the things that you need to pay attention to. Make sure that we would go from either equivalent wattage or higher. So we want to make sure that we have the same power supply connector and the same pin out as the original, and that comes from the form factor. It will tell you what type. Okay. Need to be in the form factor so that way it would fit your case. So shape, size, switch location, that's important. Otherwise it won't fit. We talk about how it should go with this. We should go with the same or higher wattage rating. We want to give it a little bit extra so that way in case we add more expansion card or other adapters, or when we plug in many USB devices, it's able to support that. Okay, so you want to leave a little extra room as far as the wattage. Don't get it so close, then it becomes, you know, we'll talk about that in week 3 material, because when it becomes short of power, you have intermittent shutdown. So that means that your system turns on and then you're using it, all of a sudden, boom, it shuts off, right? Like think about the laptop, it's low on battery, right? It wants to shut off. Intermittent shutdown could also be a heat issue too. So we want to make sure we supply enough wattage. And then we want to make sure that it supports CPU additional power, video card additional power, and motherboard. So sometimes you would have additional connector for those things. So we want to make sure that we have the proper supply for that. Okay. So as you type that down, I'm gonna. So this is the one I got. It's a 700 watts. And there are different type of brands, but I got the Smart Series for the power supply. And then we'll talk about how we can calculate the wattage. I also like the quiet bearing fan, so that way it's not too noisy, but over time that can gather dust. So, or it would wear down the bearing. So you can also maintain it where it would stay quiet. Okay. It also depends on cost and choice as well. Some people would prefer to buy kosher or other brand. I've been using Thermaltake for a while and I like that they last. So that's just my preference for the brand. Sometimes it could be just cost too. If it's cheap, I also will get it. Any question? Let me move that down so you can get the last part of that if you want it verbatim, okay? And you don't have to make it verbatim for me. As long as you summarize it, it's okay. Okay, so how do we determine the wattage? And this question came up the first week because you guys are so excited about replacing components for your project. I'm so glad because I want you to have a good experience in this class where you upgrade or improve or fix one of the systems that you have. That's the whole point. That's why the project is in place. Now, if you opted not to do the project, you will take a little bit of a hit on your grade, but so try to look at a system or ask a friend if you can upgrade his or her system if you don't have a computer of your own. Or, I did check eBay recently. You can find, $20, $30 used computer. Some of them don't have hard drives, so that's pretty easy. If everything else is working, you can buy, a SATA drive. I bought this one for like $30, so you can find really cheap, affordable components, even used parts online. So I added some links for you as far as online computer places. Even OfferUp, you can find something there as well. Okay. So for wattage, what we want is, let me zoom in so we can get both questions. For wattage, what we want is we want to add up the wattage ratings for everything that's connected to our computer, okay, inside our computer, like the motherboard, like the processor, like memory, cards, like adapters, video card, drives, bus powered, and USB devices. So where do you get this information? You can get it from, the description of the device, right? Or you can go to the manufacturer website that made the device. Usually they would have it in the detailed description. Some retailer, they don't include that information, and some retailers do, okay? So for example, I'm going to pull up one real quick for you here. So let's say that we are looking at Intel i7 processor, okay? And there are different type of i7 processors. So if you go to the Intel website and you pick the model, right, usually they would have some information there for you, or even from Amazon website, sometimes that they would tell you the wattage for that processor. Okay, so this is the 1160G. Now, the configurable TDP up is that's not it, right? So the information, make sure you click the information so that way you would see what that is, okay? And as you go through, it gives you the specification, okay? I found that some retailers are really good at giving you this compared to some manufacturer website. So let's say that if I go to Amazon and I look up Intel i7, right? And I would select like this one, which is $319. Okay. You notice that it would say the wattage right here. Okay. 95 watts. So roughly you're going to see that the modern processor is going to use approximately close to 100 watts, more or less. Okay. On the older processor, if we're looking at like Pentium 4 or some of the older AMD, they're going to range about 60 to 70 watts or even lower than that. Also depends on when it was released and so forth. So on the ninth generation processor like this one, you would see that it's about close to 100 watts. So you would take that and then you would add it to the wattage for the motherboard. Some motherboard information won't contain the wattage, so I would roughly give it like about 70 watts or 75 watts. It all depends on the features that you have on the motherboard if you can't find that description. So between the processor and the motherboard already, you're going to get close to 200 watts. And so you would have drives and other components. So we want to have a little leeway where we can add additional components to our system. Okay, so going back to the answer, you want to add up all the wattage ratings for all the components that are going to be connected. And in addition, we want to have any external devices included as well. If the total wattage used exceeds 70% of the wattage rating of your power supply, then you should go with a higher power wattage power supply. Okay. So we should add everything that we could find up to be about 70%, right? And then the 30% is going to be, you know, where that would be at the max, where it would use 100%, but it's never really operating at max, even if you're gaming a lot. Now, can you have excess? Sure, right? But to me, like in the technical world, a lot of the times we don't spend a lot of the excess is that it's just going to consume more power from your household, but it's just sitting there and it's not converting much, it's not doing much. So you're paying for a power supply that could go with a very high wattage, like 1,000 watts, but it's not doing anything. All you need is maybe about 600 or even lower than that. I previously bought 1,001 for one of the gaming system that I was building for a friend, but we decided not to put it in. So this is the 1,000 watts. So in the box. So, and it would give you some description about that. Be careful with also getting cheaper parts, possibly coming from China. Sometimes it's not rated. So that means that it hasn't gone through the testing, it's not being standardized. So just make sure you check and research. Okay, any question? Okay, so once you have everything from Unit 2, go ahead and upload that and submit it. So click Submit and then Attach or Choose File and then click Submit again. So make sure you get that to me so I can grade it. Questions? Okay. No questions? All right, I'm gonna now move on to the troubleshooting part, which is a lot of you are gonna be doing as far as your project. I'm super excited because I saw some of the things that you put in for your project. Some of you are replacing keyboard, some on a laptop, some of you are upgrading your RAM, some of you are replacing the hard drive or adding new hard drives. And if you're replacing a dead hard drive in the system, remember that you have to install OS. You can get the license that it originally came up with if you contact the manufacturer, or you can buy your own license, of course. I don't condone illegal license because, you know, we want to be legitimate. If you use illegitimate license, what will happen is that you cannot get updates, and a lot of times we want security with our updates for our software. So, you know, if you're buying a cheap license from somewhere, make sure you check it, right, to make sure that it's legitimate. And I know that there's a lot of stuff available on the internet, but just do a little bit of research before you get that software. I saw that a couple of the well, there are quite a few models of the MacBook that has faulty keyboard. So I know one of the students had added that as part of the project, so I included the link. So if you are fixing a MacBook that has faulty keyboard, make sure that you look on Apple website and they replace it for free. So you can either take it in and they can do it, or if you want to learn how to do it, you can ask them to ship you the keyboard. If it's, you know, not going to void the warranty, then you can learn how to do that. But on their website, they have some additional information there. Okay, so I put in the comments for your project. If you submitted it, I look it over and I give you some additional information. Right. All right. So let's move on to week 3, which is troubleshooting. So let's access Canvas. And then I want you to download the notes and then the in-class assignment. I will make sure I'll give you time for the lab, so I might have to not finish the in-class assignment today. We'll pick it up next week, along with talking about OS. We're not going to do as much next week because that's our last week, and I want to make sure that you can get everything completed, you know, by Sunday, so I can wrap up the class and be able to give you the grade for the course since it's only 4 weeks. Okay? So make sure we download these, and then we are doing a little bit differently in the lab, so I'll talk about that. There's a hands-on project part 2. All you have to do is answer the questions. I just want to check and see how you're doing with the project and the quiz. All right. So as we go through the project, we know that we will be fixing a lot of different things, or even if you upgrade, right, you might come across problems with, you know, a certain type of system down the line. So I want to make sure that we go over some of the troubleshooting concepts. Now, if you're starting for the A+ certification, mainly covers computer hardware repair and OS. There are 6 steps in troubleshooting, and CompTIA A+ require you to know these steps. But these steps would apply to our practical world as well. Because if you follow the steps, you don't go around looking for different things to fix, and it would save you time and effort. So the first step is to identify the problem. So if you're fixing someone else's computer, you need to ask as many questions as you can. Such as, what was changed recently, right? Did they perform any backup on their computer? Did they save their data somewhere else outside of the computer, like on the cloud, on an external hard drive? Did they make any configuration changes? Did they install any software? Okay, so that way you can identify the problem. And the more questions you ask, the easier it is for you to identify the problem. Now, in the case where you bought a used computer or somebody gave it to you and you don't get a chance to ask them, then you have to go through the process of seeing what works and what doesn't. Okay. First thing, like plug the power in, turn it on to see if it turns on, right? If it doesn't turn on, write that down. So it doesn't turn on could mean a lot of different things. Also, in the business environment, we want to check the environmental impact. For example, fire system would go off and water gets all over the desktop or the laptop, right? So that will be an environmental change. Or you might have some heat or fire damage. You might have storm that comes through and that could cause, you know, wet or dirt. exposure to the system. Also on the security side, we look at applications and logs, right? That could be a ransomware issue, or it could be a malware issue, or it could be disgruntled employee deleting a bunch of stuff from our computer which caused it not to work. So identifying a problem is a very wide area, and if you can narrow it down through and make a list of the things that you need to check, it's a lot easier. Okay, once you have an idea of what the problem is, then you need to look at what causes the problem. Okay, and it could be multiple things. So you should come up with a theory on what would be the cause. I get questions all the time. People ask me, oh, my hard drive is not working, what would be the cause? So I have to start asking them. I said, you know, did you download anything recently? Did you make any changes on your computer? You know, things like that. Did you hear any noise from your hard drive? So once we identify the problem, we would see what would be the cause. And a lot of it comes back to the symptoms, right? If the computer is healthy, it's very much, the way we design system is very much like us. If it starts having symptoms, that means it's getting sick. Something's wrong with it, right? People would tell me all the time, my computer gets really slow, okay? And so I would ask them, I said, how old is the computer? What kind of computer do you have? So we want to get more background information. So once you establish a theory, look back into the symptoms to really build that theory, right? What could be the possible cause? Then we would test it, because there might be multiple things that cause the problem, or it could be one major thing. Like earlier I mentioned that computer just frequently shut down. That could be two. I have two theories for that. One is short in power. That means power supply is not enough. Two, that could be a heat issue. Okay, because if it runs for a while, it heats up. When it warms up above a certain temperature, they regulate that. They put a ceiling temperature so that way it doesn't catch on fire, right? That's a safety standard procedure that they implemented. So when it heats up so hot, the processor gets so hot, it automatically shuts down. The user restart the computer, it starts again, run it for about 10 minutes, it shuts down again. So intermittent shutdown could be multiple things. So you want to test the theory for the cause. Then once you go through the testing, so if I assume that it's my power supply that's not enough, the way that you would test it is, ideally, we would have a good known power supply to do that. If not, take out the old power supply and use the electrical tester unit to plug it in to check, right? What is it giving as output? What is it, you know, receiving as the input? Okay. And if you're looking at the text, if you purchase the textbook, the author goes in depth with, you know, testing power supply in one of the chapters. Okay, so once we test it and we have a really good conclusive approach on how to solve the problem, we would establish a plan. So if I need to replace my power supply, my plan would be, right, if I didn't take out the power supply yet, right, shut down the computer, unplug everything, shut down the computer, drain the power, unscrew the power supply, take it out, right, find a good power supply or purchase one, and then install it and plug everything in. Okay, so establish a plan to solve the problem. Now this is important because you wanted to do it as most efficient as possible. Number one, it saves you time. Number two, if you charge people for money, right, you want to spend less time on it for the amount of money that you're charging. So let's say that I charge $70 an hour. Most average you see $50 to $70 an hour, or even $100, right? So if I spend 15 minutes on it, I don't have to worry about it. But if you spend more than what you charge, right, then you're not being efficient with your work time. So once I install the power supply, right, I want to test to see if it's working. So I would plug everything back in, plug my power cord in, make sure everything's in place, turn it on, and if it turns on, I wanted to take it, I want to use it like how people would use it. So I wanted to leave it on for a while, run some applications, go on the internet, etc., to check to see if it's continued to shut off again. Okay. So if that is the solution, then I would write it down, right? But as you go through and remove stuff, make sure that you take pictures. So we talked about that the first week. So that way you can put everything in place. But once we found a viable solution, we want to document it, because the next time that you come across the same problem, you can quickly say, oh yeah, I remember I wrote that down. So I will go back and look at my notes and see how I would fix it, right? So these are the 6 steps. Identify the problem. For the quiz, we need to know these steps. Establish a theory of the probable cause. Test the theory to determine the cost. Establish a plan of action. Verify functionality. And also implement preventative measures. Document findings and actions and outcomes. So preventative measures tend to be for the people, okay? Because once you replace the components or fix the computer, it will be good again. But you have to educate the user on how to use it. So in the case of malware or security issues, I always take the time to teach the people what is a safe website, what is not a safe website, what shouldn't you fill out when you're getting an email, right? When it pops up, you know, you have this many virus that could be a hoax. Don't click it, right? And show examples. So if you do that, right, they would appreciate your knowledge and your skills, and then that won't happen again, hopefully. But with this industry is that you will find that if everybody abides by the rule and do what they need to do, we won't have a job in IT, right? So as I tell my security students, the user is the weakest link in in the environment. So you have to educate the user first and make sure that they follow the rules. Well, I saw that some of you are fixing, I think one of you emailed me about juice on the system, right? So after you fix and troubleshoot the components that were not working, make sure you educate the people who are using the system not to have fluid around electronics, right? And then so that way they would have a good practice for future. Okay. How do you troubleshoot a power supply failure? Okay, test the power supply to verify proper operation. Meaning that we can take that power supply, and if we have another computer, we can plug it in and see if it's working with the other computer, or if we have a known good power supply, then we can take that known good power supply, plug it into the system that was having problems, and see if that's the cause. Okay? Always test it with a known good device. So if you suspect that that's a bad USB, plug in another good USB and see, right? If that's this issue, if it's showing the same issue again, that could be the port connection, it could be the OS, so there could be other areas that we need to look at. Okay. So here it tells you how to troubleshoot motherboard, RAM, CPU, and power issues. Okay. That's short caused by loose screws. When we install motherboard and components, don't touch it with metal tips of your screwdriver. Don't drop screws onto your motherboard when you're unplugging or installing things because it will create short. Don't touch the board area with our bare hands. Try to touch it from the edge, right? CPU overheating. Possible that fan is not working properly, so we need to clean the fan. We might need to replace the failed fan. Okay, or the heatsink is not functioning, so we can replace the heatsink and reapply the thermal paste when we do that. Power supply overheating. You should smell something. Okay, but if in case you don't, right, you would the system will likely shut down if you don't have enough power supply or when it's too hot. Very rare that you would see fire from computer. The way they design the components is they regulate the temperature on it so it shuts down or it shuts off before it actually have enough heat to catch fire. But you know, you do see some rare cases like that. You would smell like it would smell burnt coming from it. So when you turn on the system and it starts smelling burnt, that usually comes from power supply. Okay. Not enough air ventilation would also cause heat issues. So heat is a common enemy for components. So make sure that we clean it. We have proper fan running. And then power supply failure, we mentioned that we would test it with the proper operations. And if you have electrical testing unit, you can use it if you know how to use it. If not, we just use a known good device, like a computer or another power supply. Okay. System lockups, very common. I fixed many cases like this throughout my career. Even now, people still ask me about this, right? And you see this a lot. So system lockup is often memory content corruption. Okay. And on Windows, you would also see blue screen of death often occur, right? That blue screen and a bunch of error message shows up. Okay, they changed the way it looks. It has the little emoji sad face with the code on the bottom for Windows 10. But prior to 7, blue screen of death was common. So we'll get to that section. But system lockup is a memory corruption issue. So you need to shut down the computer, remove and reinstall the RAM. If it's dusty, you gotta make sure you clean it. Make sure that we clean the socket properly. Make sure that we have proper vents and fans. So in case it's overheating and it's not riding as it should. So if everything is appropriate, we also need to check to see if the specification, the speed, and the module type matches up. Otherwise, you're going to get a long beep or a bunch of beeps anyway. So your system will not turn on without RAM. Okay? Okay, so it tells you to check specification there. So a lot of these are good tips, not just for practical use, but also for our certification if we need to take that. There are software tools that you can use, like CIS software. CI software actually allows you to test your RAM. Some motherboard company would also include software so you can test components that's attached to the motherboard. So you can use, like Crucial, they provide that. So you can use that to test your RAM. Okay. And it will tell you like failure rate, success rate, and how it's writing and reading, and that's helpful. Okay. Now, if it's been overclocked to increase performance, you need to reset it in case you have corruption problem, because you're just cranking up the speed of it and it might not, it's just not working appropriately because the speed has been increased. So we want to go back to BIOS and change the options. And then we can also add additional cooling. So think of overclock as in we turbocharged or turbo, we boost it, right? And you can do that on any processor, really. So we can change the configuration so that way it would work over time or harder, possibly for our gaming purposes or our high processing task. Okay. Close this. Any question? Okay. So to answer number 3, we know that the common cause for the system lockup will be the corruption of memory content. Now, all motherboards, especially the older motherboards actually, is equipped with a thing called power on self-test, which is post. And what that does is, if you ever turn on the computer and you hear a small beep, right, a short beep, right, that means that when it does go through the power on self-test, it tried to distribute power to the connected components, and it would see if there's a success in the connection, if those components receive power, right? So if the RAM is not installed, it's not going to get the signal response back. So it's going to signal you, it's going to beep so that way you know that your RAM is loose or it's not plugged in. Okay? So it's a way that the system would check to see if all the components are in place. So when you get a high frequency continuous beep, likely that there's motherboard or processor issue, okay? And it could vary from one to another in the frequency for the beats, right? Sometimes you get like, a set of very long range beats. Sometimes it's continuous, multiple, like 3, 2, 1 beats. Question?
Yes, if you get one beep and then the laptop turns off, what's the one beep on an old laptop?
Is it like a one long beep?
Like beep, and then it turns off.
Yeah, so possible that it's not getting signal from your board or your processor, or sometime in the case. And so the way that you look at the postcode is really to the BIOS manufacturer. It's the chip that's on the motherboard that would store your system information. That's why it needs that battery. And every manufacturer use different code set. Okay, so I'll show you in your notes. I had a system that gives me like what you described, and it was a RAM issue. And then I have other cases that actually describe it's the board issue. So and a lot of times, the way the beep is treated is that it would see like the components on the board as part of that board. So they would use like the same beep for multiple things. So what I would recommend is look at the brand of that motherboard and look at the type of BIOS that they use, and you can find a beep code from that company. Okay, so here's AMI is a common one along with Phoenix. So when you see like Dell systems, Dell actually modify their BIOS, but in the back it's somebody else that's producing that chip. So the code beeps could be varied from one to the next. But when you hear like a long series of beep, likely across manufacturer, that's board or RAM issue or processor issue. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So here it tells you on how to look at the information. So Phoenix uses beep codes for both defects and normal procedure, right? And then AMI, it has like the 10 fatal error codes, and it also has 8 defective or missing module or card codes. And they publish this on their website. Okay, so that's power on self-test. Okay, so here's some example ones. So Phoenix, it does sequence of the beeps, and then the AMI is slightly shorter. Sometimes it does the 11 beeps for memory. So you hear beep, 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 it keeps going. Then you would know that that's the RAM if you use an AMI. And then for the video, if it gets no video signal, right? And they varied across. Okay, and of course we would also see that your monitor doesn't turn on. That's a huge sign if you check if there's power. Okay, so processor and motherboard, right? And so you would also hear a series of beeps. Okay, so for number 5, this is a common issue for many people who are new to computer, using the computer that is, right? And for 5, it says, Tom asked you to fix his computer that has blank screen when it turns on. How do you assist Tom in troubleshooting his computer? Okay. First thing first, check for power, no matter what you troubleshoot, to see, right, why isn't it turned on? Common thing is people don't switch it on, plug it in, or press the power button. Right, very common. So check to see if there's power connection and the power button is pressed. Okay, and people call technician out just for that sometimes. So we want to make sure we check that. I know it sounds silly, but it is the case. Verify to see if the cables are secured and connected. So making sure, especially your drives. Okay. Also, video adapter. Okay. And to further expand on that, we would disable the onboard video. So when we say onboard video, we mean that it's integrated onto the motherboard. It's built into the motherboard. And if Tom has a video adapter or video card, right? In most cases, now the new system, it sees the video card and it would refer to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would always do that. So we want to make sure that we disable one and we enable the other one. And how do you do that? You can do that in BIOS or Uefi. You would see the 2 configuration there, and you would select the one you want to disable, and you would disable for the onboard. We want to use the adapter. We also want to use the monitor input settings to change the input options, because that could be selected on the wrong input, and that is also a common mistake, is that they had it switch between HDMI 1 and HDMI 2, and check the connection that ties to the input, or VGA and HDMI. So we want to make sure that we have the cable connected to the appropriate port, and that port is seen and selected as an input. So next is we would use a flashlight to check if there's any visible text on the image. If you do see very light text that's shown, even if it's black and it has some tiny speck of the text, that means that the inverter or the backlight is burned out. Okay, that means that we have to we replace the monitor or we disassemble the monitor to replace the backlight and the inverter. And if you have no experience working with monitor, right, be very careful when you use, especially the old monitor. Don't open it because you gotta ground it. But right, there are tutorial videos on how to replace inverter and backlight, but the effort that goes into that is a lot greater than buying $99 monitor. So I just want to let you know. Okay, use a known good device such as another video adapter or monitor to check it. Right, if it has another screen, we can plug it in to see if it shows up on the good screen or another screen. If he has another video adapter, or we can switch it between the onboard and the video adapter. It could be a bad video adapter. Okay, that's how you would test. So the diagnosis, now some technicians don't charge for diagnosis, but when I was a field tech, anytime that they dispatch me, right, the company charged another company $100 an hour, and they pay me $60 for the time I go. And anything after that is by the hour. So, and this was long ago, right, in 2000. So you see now that it would be a lot more. Some technicians charge more than 100. Some technicians charge about $70. It all depends on their experience and their knowledge and skills as well. Okay. So people say that, oh, well, computer is so cheap. Why do we bother to learn about this? Well, guess what? COVID-19 hits, everybody uses computer. And as you know, printers, laptops are selling out like crazy, right? Everybody needs it. So instead of buying a $1,000 laptop, you can fix the one that you have and be able to make it work and use it. Because in some cases, even if you have the money, you might not be able to get it in time. So when I do security work, I always travel with at least 2 laptops because, you know, you never trust one device. That could go out and then there goes your work. So I always have a backup system. Any question? Okay. So you can find additional insights here. I put the link for the BIOS there in case you want to check, but check the one that you have first. Blank screen at boot up, common thing, video configuration, cabling problem, power connection problem. Also input, so we touch on that. Okay. Different types of cable, we spent a lot of time on that last week and the week before. So here it shows you for the LCD inverter, especially with the laptop. Okay, Cmos Battery. So a way that we can reset your BIOS is through unplugging the battery or reset the jumper. So there's some motherboard don't come with the Cmos battery. It would come with the jumper and it would say BIOS in small writing next to it. You would take there's like this little plastic notch on a pin and you would take it off the pin just to disconnect it and then for maybe 30 seconds and then put it back on. So that would allow us to reset BIOS password. And also, you know, if we unplug the battery, that also works as well on the older system. Now on the new BIOS version, sometimes that they require you to have additional steps in order to reset it. But companies would put administrative password on BIOS so that way people don't go in and meddle with their configuration. Okay. So CMOS battery, it uses the CR2030. And that's the round silver looking battery that you can find. Sometimes I find it at the dollar store. They don't sell it as much anymore, but you can find them at a home improvement store, Walmart, Target even. They're about a couple bucks through those stores. And I talked about how when this battery goes out, your clock is wrong when you turn it on frequently. So, and life for the battery is about 5 to 7 years, depends on how often you use. So this battery retains BIOS setting information. So if it's dying or it's going bad, what happens is it's not retaining information, it's not supplying power to that chip, and that chip requires power to retain information, so that's why you're losing time, okay? Or you have the wrong time. Okay. So here it talks about how you should check the CMOS battery to reset BIOS settings. If it doesn't work, you can look at to possibly replace the CMOS chip, and you have to acquire the chip from the company. Some motherboard company would produce their own chip, likely not in most cases. It comes from other manufacturer, and you have to solder it on. So you have to use a soldering iron to solder it on once you take it off. So it is a little bit of a process, but you can replace the BIOS chip. You can also flash BIOS by downloading the software or the firmware for that chip and then rerun it. So that way you can have it updated with the new BIOS version. Especially if you're using an older computer with the newer components, if it's not recognizing your video card or your, different type of like Ethernet adapter, etc., right? Sometimes you have to upgrade BIOS by flashing it and installing the new one. And you can download it and put it on USB and then run it. Back in the day, we used to burn it to CD and then run it, but now we don't anymore. We use USB. So USB flash drive is also a good tool to put into your kit, especially if you become a service technician or if you're fixing people's computer. Okay. So when your computer boots to the wrong drive, right, or it's attempting to boot to USB instead, we simply just go to BIOS and change the boot priority. You can point to hard drive, right, which hard drive it should be booting from. And if it points to the USB, then it won't boot from the proper drive. Now, when do we boot to USB? When you're installing operating system on your new hard drive that you are replacing, okay? When you are trying to run certain type of, booting type of environment, a lot of the time OS based, right? I had told my students in 25, and I think I mentioned Hiren. I put a link in the data recovery page. So Hiren is an old tool. It's been around for a long time. You can use it to reset password, on the older Windows. You can use it to do a lot of different things. You can check out the website. But you can put it on a USB and then boot to it, and then be able to use the tool at boot to troubleshoot to reset things. And it's like a one-stop shop tool. I love it. So I recommend if you are a troubleshooting computer, you use that tool for different purposes. And it even has like, some security-based type of tool within. It's, it doesn't have everything, but it has a lot of, different tools in that tool set. Okay. If the computer continues to reboot, power supply problem. Okay. Or sometimes it could be other things. It would be Windows configuration settings, and that tends to be the issue. We are going to stop at 2 for break. So I have a few more minutes, so I want to wrap this up, and then we'll come back we'll spend a little bit more time on this. The last hour, I want to show you the lab, and you can finish it, you know, using Practice Lab anytime. But I want to show you how to use it. Okay. All right. So if you turn on the computer and then it keeps trying to reboot, that could be a couple of things. It could be either too high or too low voltage from your power supply, not enough power, too high of a power that's being supplied. Then we wanted to see if we can look at the power supply to fix it, test the power supply, use a multimeter, or test it with the known good power supply. Also, if it's a Windows system, check Windows configuration. Okay. Especially when you get the blue screen of death error. So that's, and here it walks you through on how to use Control Panel. And to open Control Panel, you simply search Control Panel, right? On the older Windows, like Windows 7 and prior, it's part of the Start menu. So here's the default category view. Okay. Now, if you want to get into the system information, you would go into System Security Applet under that, and then System. And it tells you everything about that. It also includes Device Manager link on the left, where you can troubleshoot your device. And then you can also set up like remote access and other areas. So this is Control Panel. I tell my Windows administration server class, this is your best friend in Microsoft. And on the server level, it's the server manager that's your best friend. You're the best friend. So learn to use this to really configure. I know that the new version of Windows have settings, right? Settings is great, but setting doesn't give you a lot of the back end, the back administration in the OS. Okay. So for number 6, it says you're given an old computer. When it is turned on, you notice that the clock shows incorrect time. What is the likely cause of this problem, and how would you fix the problem? And I mentioned this. The problem might be caused by bad Cmos battery or Cmos chip. Replace the Cmos battery if the problem persists, checking the motherboard for replacement, either for the chip replacement or the entire motherboard replacement. Okay. For number 7, it says, a client asks you to fix her computer, which has continuous reboot problem. What is typically the source of the problem? How do you troubleshoot this issue? Power supply is usually the cause of the continuous reboot. Test power supply with the multimeter or the voltage range. And if you have a multimeter at home, you can use that. But if you do have another power supply that's good, you can use it to check as well. And multimeter, you can find it for about $10, $12 online or even in stores. Okay. Question.
Where do you put the multimeter when you test the power supply?
To the wire or to the connector. So we would start with the motherboard connector. Where's my power supply? Sorry. Right? So now also there are, because this, all of this signal gets converted and it gets sent here, right? So all your power goes from here to the connector and then to the motherboard. So now we gotta give it power to really test it, right? So if this is plugged in and turned on, you can check to see if it's receiving power on the connector end. Now, I don't know if in the last, I might have it later on in the notes. You can probably see it. If not, I'll try to repost a document that has how to test it for you.
So you don't put it on the plastic part, you just put it on the wire?
Yeah, well, yeah, the metal exposure, because you wanted to get the electrical signal from the conductive part. Okay, and then on the multimeter, we want to also control the knobs or the buttons to make sure that we have the right range to test. Otherwise, you won't be able to test it. Okay. And then lastly, for number 7, we want to use a known good power supply to verify the source of the problem. Okay. Another issue with computer does not turn on. It says that for 8, it says Larry's computer does not turn on. What's the common cause? So there would be multiple causes. Could be, right? Bad power supply, not getting power, loose power cable connection from the back of the power supply, or it's not plugged in. Power buttons are not pressed on the case. Bad power connection from the, either from surge protector or the power source. Don't plug your computer directly to the socket. We always want to use surge protector to avoid brownouts and short. So make sure that you would use the proper surge protector. Okay. And sometimes they sell extension cord that looks like surge protector, but they're not. So make sure that they're surge protector, because that gets regulated as coming through from the outlet to your surge protector, and it properly get distributed. And then also incorrect or missing front panel connection, where when you press the power button and if it gets disconnected from that button, then you can't turn it on. So first, I would make sure that I check all the power connection, the cable, the switch, all of that first. If all of those things are in place, then I can narrow down to power supply or panel connection to the motherboard, to the actual case. Okay. All right. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes break. So we can take a short break, and then we can come back and continue. Okay. All right. Let's take a break, everybody. So we're back. Had a little bit of a break. So what I'm going to do, I know that we have a little bit of a challenge seeing all my answers. So if you need specific answers, let me know, and then I will try to paste that into the chat. Because screen share is only going to be so large. Okay. Okay, so we left off with finishing 8. And we'll go for another hour to go over troubleshooting, and then I will walk you through the lab and give you time to work on the lab. So for number 9, it asks you, what are the common causes of overheating in a computer? And the common causes are overloading, fan failure. That means that we're not supplying enough air, which causes to heat up. And overloading is that when we have system devices working harder, it's going to also increase the temperature. It's going to get hotter. Inadequate airflow outside the system, meaning that we might have coverage through the ventilation. So where we place the system is also important. Inadequate airflow inside the system, it could be dust, or it would be too much cable that will prevent air to flow into the proper area, like processor. Too much dirt or dust. So we want to clean it out. So occasionally, if you use your system every day, I would recommend do it throughout the year a few times. And it also depends on the environment that you're in as well. So in my case, I would have a lot of dock air that could get into the system, so I would have to clean that out occasionally. So you do see that, you know, the fur would impact the airflow as well if you have pets. So to answer 9, we want to put down overloading, fan failure, inadequate airflow outside and inside the system, and dirt and dust. That would cause overheating. And you might have intermittent shutdown, meaning that it could also be a heating issue. Okay, any question on 9? Okay, so how can you improve the airflow to make your system cooler? Cable management is essential. I know that it's really easy to zip tie everything up and to make it where, you know, it's not hanging everywhere. But we want to also make sure that we keep the cable managed together, and so that way you can have proper airflow for the system. On the gaming system, you see that they do sell cable ties and kits for cable management. You can also run some of the cable to the other side of the case panel before you put the cover on, so that way it would not be in the way and it's not impeding the airflow. So we want to use cable ties, and if you don't have the Velcro tie that you often see on some of the expensive system, you can buy zip tie at a dollar store or any of the department store. You would be able to find them. And I normally buy all sizes so I can use it for different purposes. So you can buy a container of different sizes, but I've seen them at the dollar store or the home improvement store as well. We want to replace missing slot cover that's in the back of where the case is, right? Sometimes people take out video adapter or a different expansion card and they don't put the cover back on. Most cases would come with them, but sometimes extra, so you can screw in the cover for the missing expansion cards or the ones that used to be there. We gotta make sure that the case fan and the CPU fans are working properly. That means that they are spinning and they are working, right? So make sure that they have power. And sometimes you would have case fans that are not functioning after wear and tear. And you can find them for a couple of dollars if you want to buy an individual fan, but I want to show you. I bought additional case fan because the case that I bought a while back, it only had 2, so I want to add more to it. And then I found some RGB ones, so they would be like colorful, so you can have it a certain color if you like, or multiple color. So they do sell fancier case fans now. But the average case fan that you see, like the black or the clear ones, they go for a couple dollars. So to answer number 10, we put down that we would use cable tie to secure access cable and connectors, so you can bundle them together and tie them up. Second, we would replace any missing slot covers in the case. Why is that? Because the case is designed to circulate air properly, and so when you have missing case slot cover, that doesn't circulate the air properly. And people think that when they leave the panel open, that would help the computer, but it actually introduces foreign things like dust, dirt, hair, etc., right? And there are open case systems where we don't have any cover at all, but you probably have to ground it properly and secure it properly, so that way nothing can touch it and destroy the system or hurt people. So the second thing is we want to replace missing slot cover. And third is we want to make sure that the case fan and CPU fans are working properly. Okay, so those are the 3 things. Tie your cable, replace missing slot covers, and make sure the fans are working. For number 10. So there are many ways, we talked about this during the first week, that we can clean up dust and dirt. So for 11, what should you use to remove dust and dirt from inside the computer case? We can use a small vacuum cleaner to suction up all the little dust bunnies that gathers in the case. Or if you use compressed air, you can use the spray, the canned air, or actual compressor with the hose. Take it outside, turn it on low, right, and then blow it out. Now, there are many ways that we can clean up the dust, but we want to do that occasionally, so a few times a year with the desktop. Okay. So I put down vacuum cleaner and compressed air. Most field technicians, you will find that they would have a small hand vacuum that they bring along with them, especially if you have to service old systems or existing system in business environment. So sometimes you can't install adapters or memory or processor, until you clean it. So we want to make sure that we would have the vacuum handy, or if you have canned air handy, that would help as well, because business might not have it on site for you. Okay, any question as far as having more airflow and cleaning up dirt and dust?
Nope.
Okay. All right, for 12, it says John uses a USB port on his PC to charge his Android smartphone. He notices the smartphone does not get charged in various times. What is the cause of this problem? How should John fix the problem? So first thing first, we wanted to check the cable. Could be bad connection or bad cable. So the way that we check connection is to plug it into a different USB port, and the computer, likely that you would have multiple ports are available. Sometimes keep in mind that companies disable the front USB port so that way people don't plug in devices. So that might be the things that you need to check too. So first I would check the USB cable, test it with the known good cable. If it's a bad cable, we would replace it. Second, the problem could be caused from power supply unit, your PSU. That means that it's not giving enough power to the ports. So if I have a very limited power supply that only supplies to all the internal components, then there's not enough power that goes to the port. So the second thing we need to check is insufficient power supply unit. If that's the case, we look at the wattage and all the required components wattage. If it's not enough, then we would replace it with the higher power supply rating. Third thing, bad port on the motherboard. We would test it with a known good device. So if you plug in the Android phone to that port, and if it's not charging the Android phone or seeing the Android phone, then we would try to plug in maybe a USB flash drive or another device to that USB port. If it sees the other devices, that means possibly that the Android phone is not configurable on that device, or it's not able to receive power through that. So, yes.
Like if none of those three work, is it possible that we can switch out the charging port? Like for example, if it's like a micro USB, can we change it out to like a C type?
You can by soldering it on, but likely that the motherboard is not, it's not able to distribute signal to that port itself. So internally, that motherboard is probably malfunctioning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Motherboard, if we were to like switch out like the charging port or like the USB type, would the motherboard detect either one, no matter what we change out?
You're right. If it's not supporting signal to that area, likely that doesn't matter what you do there, it's still not going to work. So so once you tested everything through, that could possibly be just a motherboard issue, and motherboard does go bad. It's on the more of the rare occasion, but sometimes they are even bad out of the box, just like any electronics.
So if the motherboard is good, if we change out the charging port, would it work?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a bad experience where I had a USB-C USB cable that was charging my Android phone. And so I bought one of those dollar cables at the Dollar Tree to replace it. And then after a month, I noticed my phone was acting weird. And so I changed out that dollar cord for the, the name brand one, and it started acting normally again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you do see the grade of the type of cable. The cheaper the cable, because of the quality that goes into that cable, you would see that it transfers data slower, it charges slower. And so even though it's still charged, it's going to be at a lower rate. So because of the copper quality that they put inside that cable, they're all copper. Okay.
So there's no reason to ever even buy a cable from the Dollar Tree store then, is there?
Unless it's an emergency and you have nowhere else to go. you know, be suspicious of those cable. Yeah, I would, you know, before you even try to use it, test it first and see, you know, if it's not detecting your device, it's not a good cable. Yeah, I'm very suspicious of the cheaper cable, because even if you spend a couple dollars more to buy a, you know, a good quality cable, then yeah, especially with Apple devices, you gotta be, you know, you gotta be careful. And you, some of you know this because you have iPhone or iPad. When you buy like the non-approved Apple type of cable or you know, plugs, you tend to see that it's not gonna give you the best transfer rate. It's not charging properly. Over time, it also, you know, would impact the device as in battery if you're using it for charge and so forth. So yeah, I had that experience with the cheaper too. Like I had an emergency case where I was in out of state and I had to buy from Walmart like an all-in-one kit with the different adapter with the different connector. And yes, it took a long time to really even charge or transfer data. So, and on the label, it usually tells you the compatibility, the transfer rate, but sometimes, you know, generic stuff will not work across. So just be careful with those. Yeah, most of the time it's the cable. Okay. For 13, it says, Jacqueline turns on her computer. She notices a strong burning smell coming from the inside the computer. What could be the cause, and what is your advice for fixing this problem? So I mentioned this before, but we're going to answer this with burnt power supply. If you smell burnt, that's likely the power supply. Replace the power supply. Okay. Because if you prolong it, that could cause there will be harmful consequence. So we want to replace the power supply. Sometimes it's not the power supply. It would be, I had a typo here. Let me fix that. A bad capacitor. And what the capacitor looks like, let me see if I can get the motherboard. And I think in the notes in the picture, it shows you that. So this is an old motherboard that's not used anymore, but you see this little cylinder-like round tube-like things on the motherboard, right? They're in various areas. It depends on the board, but you would see them throughout, okay? They're like round, cylinder-like capacitors. Sometimes they would have little copper wrapped around it, like these, okay? So now how do we know that it's a bad capacitor? You would see some residue around it, like brownish or grayish residue, okay? And as the capacitor burns out, it would create a smell. And when you turn on the computer and you detect an odor, like a burnt odor, you know, if it's not the capacitor, it could be the capacitor, okay? So what we want to do is, if it's a bad capacitor, we can replace the capacitor, right? Get the capacitor, and we would take that out and use a soldering iron to solder it on. Most people, they would just opt to get motherboard, because if it's an older motherboard, you can probably find one equivalent used or new that's, you know, very, very affordable versus ordering the capacitor and solder. But yes, you can replace that. So we would replace the capacitor if it's a bad capacitor, or we would replace the power supply. Okay. So now you know where that smell is coming from. I had a couple of cases where I've seen where, you know, as soon as I turn on the computer, I smell it, and then I have to check. But that's just a good note. Okay, If you ever use Windows environment, you know blue screen of death occurs. Okay, occasionally on the older Windows, you often see those. So when this happens, your whole screen turns blue and then you get an error code, right? It will give you a number and it will say something about the error. On the newer Windows version, right, they put a little emoji thing and then they have an option for you to restart. So no matter what you do on older or newer OS, you still have to reboot the computer because there's nothing else you can do beyond that point, right? It's blue screen and so you have to restart. So before you restart, you need to write down the error code so that way you can look it up, okay? And usually there are 3 things that would be the cause. Okay, so for number 14, I put down record the error code, restart the system, and research it. So that way you can fix the problem. I was watching a movie the other day, and it shows on the movie that they have a blue screen. And then the person in the movie, she just press a button, and it goes back normally. But that's not the case. So I know that the person who wrote that screenplay or whatever, they didn't know too much technical because you don't just simply press the enter button to get it out of blue screen. You have to restart the computer. So record the error code, reboot the system, and research that error code. Now, for 15, there are 3 causes for BSOD, which is blue screen of death. Okay. Incompatible or defective hardware or software. A lot of times it's hardware. Like people would add a new adapter or RAM. They just recently install something and then they turn it on. It was working for a few minutes and then boom, you get a blue screen. Then there's incompatibility with hardware. Now with the software, they might have installed an application that's not compatible with that OS, right? And usually now I think that on the newer OS, it would tell you. And we have backward compatibility going from 64-bit using 64-bit OS using 32-bit application. It's only going to run up to 32-bit. But way back when you're having, so let's say if you're having 32-bit operating system trying to run 64-bit application, it's not going to be able to do that. It will generate, actually, you use Windows, it will tell you an error, or other OSs will tell you, yeah, it's not able to run that application. Second thing that would cause the BSOD is registry problems, okay? Because when you install hardware or software, right, as the configuration or the system recognizes that hardware, it updates, it changes, it modifies the registry file. Now, in the case of there's other foreign element that changes the registry file, like the human, like malware, right, then it creates the blue screen of death for Windows. So when we install new hardware, we want to make sure that we check the configuration and the setting and make sure it's compatible. Now, with registry, human can go in and delete things in registry. And if they delete the wrong thing or they modify the wrong thing in registry, that can create problem as well. There are registry cleaner software tools, right? And that's just going to clean up some of the things that are in there. And then it also allows you to back it up. But when you see blue screen of death, that tends to be a registry problem as well, which comes back to defective hardware or incompatible hardware or defective or incompatible software. Third thing is malware, okay? Not just virus. So the virus, it needs human intervention to take it where it needs to go. For example, like download, install. So a lot of the times virus come through as attachment, right? Or it's on a website and somebody has to click a link. Okay. Now a Trojan is, it hides itself, it masquerades inside something else, like the Trojan the story back then in history, right? It would masquerade itself looking like a benign or a useful file, okay? But the worm, it does not need intervention from human, it automates, okay? So it spreads. So if we just say viruses, viruses could be very limited. I should change that and make it malware, okay? So what the malware would do is some malware, most malware would change registry files, system files. Also, right, it would change files. Virus would impact files. So virus would change the way the file is. It could be attribute of the file. It could be many different things. Okay.
How
So
does
when
that sorry.
yes, go ahead.
How does that look?
How does that look? There's so many different malware. Are you talking about a virus?
Yeah, but
Okay. So let's say that you get an email and it comes as an attachment. Okay. And some virus could come as an attachment when it's embedded into a file that you would know, like a JPEG, like a picture. Now, if it's embedded and it's hidden, it is a Trojan. So if it's like embedded into a picture, so for example, your friend send you an infected file of a picture of a celebrity, right? And people tend to do that to kind of lure you to open. So when we open it, right, it's downloaded, and so when it's embedded into a different file format, that's a Trojan. A virus, it could be just any file. It could be a .doc, it could be a .batch, it could be in. So the I love you virus is the old form of virus. I'm sidetracking a little bit here since we're talking about malware, right? It capitalized on the hidden file extension in the older Windows. So when people see I love you, they automatically say, oh, somebody's sending me a note, I love you, and they would click it, right? And the old viruses, they're still out in the internet. 60% of your malware is detectable. That means up to 60%. So close to 50%, 40 to 50% that are not detectable, even in the case of anti-malware. So because it changes so fast and it's so much, and we are very reactive to it. So it's, and the way that the anti-malware works is it looks at signature, like the way it's coded or the behavior. So more to come in the security, but yeah.
If we see, like, if it's developing, is there a way we can stop it? Is there like a
so your anti-malware tools, your software, like you can get even free ones like AVG, if you're using paid one like McAfee or Norton or Symantec, there's so many different type of anti-malware tool. I use Avira. I use the free ones, and then I also pay for some of the license for the other ones depending on the system. But what that will do is it contains it, and so that way it stop it from spreading further. So now we don't want to remove that file, because if you start deleting the system file that's infected, it would cause other issues, errors in the operating system. And people argue about Mac and Linux and Windows, which one have. So you see drastically a huge jump in Mac OS and iOS malware recently, like a huge jump in the last couple of years. So, you're not safe no matter what OS you're using, Android, which is Linux platform. And so it's just a good practice, smartphone, system, computer, devices, put anti-malware on it. And if you visit the internet with that device, you gotta make sure you have anti-malware. So coming back to this, sorry I sidetracked because I love security. Question 15, 3 areas incompatible hardware and software, or defective hardware and software, registry problems, and malware. Okay, so that would cause blue screen of death. Now on Mac OS, you have this thing called pinwheel of death, where it's just pinwheel forever and it doesn't stop. It doesn't let you do anything else. It kind of stall and it pinwheels. That's called pinwheel of death in Mac OS. And 3 causes for that: lack of RAM, lack of internal memory, lack of free space for swap files. That could be your main storage, which is your hard drive, or damaged application. So if it's a corrupted application, whether either through usage or download, whatever it is, right, you would get this pinwheel of death on Mac OS. So when people call and ask you about that, you would look into these 3 areas: lack of RAM, lack of free space for swap files, and damaged application for number 16. Okay, any question? Okay, so for 17, what additional tools should you add to your basic computer repair toolkit? Remember we talked about that day 1, right? What should we put together if we want to fix the computer? So here's some of the additional things that you should add to your toolkit, especially when you're troubleshooting CPU, RAM, and power. A multimeter, right? You can, if you already have one, you can add one as part of your toolkit. You can put it in a toolbox or a box, a bag, whatever, so that way you can take it with you whenever you need to repair. If you don't have one, you can try to find one, and they are affordable. Power supply tester, they do sell tester kit, but in my personal opinion, a multimeter is all that you need anyway. But I usually would have good known devices with me, so when I do try to fix people's system, if it's away from home, I would have, like, you know, a cheap video adapter that works, USB flash drive, cables, extra cables in my toolkit, so I can test for cable, you know, Ethernet adapter, or you can buy the USB one. They're a few dollars. So, you know, it depends on how wide of the range you're trying to fix. But if you become a field service technician, it's always good to have good known devices, okay? A loopback plug, especially for connection testing, so that way we can see if it's reconnecting to itself. And then the postcard, you can find this in USB now. So you can plug that in and it will give you the proper readout for the error code. So in the older postcard, right, you have to actually plug it into a slot, like a PCI slot, or, you know, one of the slot on the motherboard. But on the new postcard, you can find them with the USB. Okay. So those are some of the additional things that you should consider if you wanted to do this professionally. And we can acquire as we go. We don't have to have it right off the bat, but it's just good to have on hand. Okay. Any question with 17? Multimeter, power supply tester, loopback plugs, and postcard USB. So if you put something in chat, I'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit delayed with chat because we want to cover some of these areas before 3. Okay, for 18, this is a big list. Okay, what are the common causes of read-write failure in hard drives? How do you detect these issues? Okay, so first, if the drive is physically damaged, if there's physical damage to the drive, listen to noise, right? If you hear any grinding, any scratching noise, especially with HDD, you will hear noise if it's going bad. Damaged cable, test it with the known good cable. Sometimes there will be a breakage in the cable as well, like, you know, there's a cut or a rip. Question? Okay. Damage to SATA host adapter on the motherboard where you plug in the drive to the motherboard, if there's damage there. So test the original cable with different connection port. So plug it to the next port to see if that's working. If it works, then the first port could be bad. Overheated hard disk. So we need to check to see if there's airflow to the disk. Maybe where it's mounted, there's no airflow there where it would be hot. Check the system temperature, and in BIOS it tells you the system temperature. Now some of the CPU tool, right, like if you buy an AMD or the new Intel, it comes with the Turbo Boost software tool, right, to control your processor and check the processor. It actually tells you your system temperature and the CPU temperature. So we want, the computer likes it really cool. This is why when you go into the server room, it's very, very cool, right? We want it very cool because that way it's happy. So we wanted to keep it below 60. Most of the time on the newer system, you would see it's like 30, 40 sometimes, right? So we want it very cool, okay? So as long as, and when it gets to like 70 or 80, then that's when you see intermittent shutdown, when it gets very hot. So usually it doesn't go above that because they don't want components to burn. So overheated hard disk could be the area. So we want to check for airflow and temperature. To prevent overheating, we can add more fans. And then if you have disks that are stacked on top of each other, separate them. So unmount them by unscrewing them and then put them into a different bay or a different area of the case. That's if the cable is able to reach. Lastly, overheated CPU or chipset. So we want to check the case fans. We want to check power supply fans and CPU heatsink. Remove all dust and intake area, so it could be on the case itself. Okay. Make sure that the heatsink is not loose, so it needs to sit on the processor tight. Okay, because if it's wiggling, then you have air gap, and air gap means it's not absorbing heat. Make sure that we have thermal grease or thermal paste in place, and they dry up so we can replace them. Okay. So for 18, physical damage of drive, listen for noise. Damaged cable, test with the known good cable. Damaged SATA host adapter on the motherboard, test it with the original cable on a different port. Overheated hard disk, check for airflow and system temperature. Right, relocate the drive if it's stacked on another drive. Overheated CPU or chipset, check fans and heatsink and remove dust or dirt. And thermal paste, check the thermal paste too. Okay, any question? So I will do maybe a one more, and then I'll talk about the lab and give you time to work on your lab. Okay, any question? Okay, so how do we improve the performance of our SATA disk? For the next question. So we want to check the jumper in the back of the drive, if it's an old IDE drive, to make sure that it's the right rate for drive speed. Because sometimes that could be set wrong and that would slow down the drive. So make sure that we set the jumper for the right drive speed on the older drive. Use the right SATA cable, and you know that there's different SATA. So if you have a SATA 3 drive, you're going to make sure you use SATA 3 cable, and the label of the cable will tell you what SATA that is. They look the same, but on the label of the cable near the connector, you would see the type of SATA. Third, configure SATA host adapter. So we want to make sure that we configure it whether for IDE, RAID, or AHCI for hot swap. So you can configure that in BIOS or Uefi. And then lastly, the fourth thing is we choose auto setting on SATA host adapter speed or set appropriate speed. So if you choose the auto setting, it's just going to go to whatever the interface or the host adapter, how it's connected and how it's designed. Like if it's a SATA 3 drive, if you have it auto setting, it would revert to SATA 3. Okay. Now, if you need to manually set the speed, then you can go into BIOS or Uefi to change that. Okay. Well, maybe I'll do one more. I'll stop at 20. Questions? So for 19, set jumper to the right rate of the drive speed. Second, use appropriate cable for the right drive. Third, configure host adapter for appropriate mode. Fourth, choose auto setting or set appropriate speed for the drive. So if you're replacing your hard drive for your project, these are the things that you need to look at, right? These are the things that you need to do. Make sure that you use the right cable, make sure you configure before you install your operating system on it. Okay, and next week we'll talk about OS if we get to finish the rest of the week 3. Okay, lastly, how do we improve solid state drive? I know many of you are upgrading your disk drive to solid state for your project. If you're using the solid state that connects to SATA, make sure that the best is to use SATA 3, which gives you 6 gigabit per second. And if your board has the SATA Express, then you can use that, which is faster. That's great. So make sure that you connect to the SATA 3 port. Now, if you're using the M2, make sure that we put it into the appropriate slot, right? Not just any PCI Express, but it has to be the M.2. One of the things that you can do is you can use this part, this is for Windows, to really specify the alignment of the disk. And I include the link there, but you can also look up on how to use this part command that allows you to do disk partition. Okay. For the utility, we would use trim. And trim would work with Windows 7, 8, 8.1, and 10. And trim allows it's designed to use the space that from the deleted files and reallocated that space for other purposes. So in the old way on the OS, you would use disk optimization or defragmentation. It's exactly that for solid state, is to use the trim. And then you also have other software tools such as Tweaker Utility and the Trickley utility, you can find them like, from lpamsoft.com and other, or Windows, to maximize the performance of SSD. So all that does is software contain the instructions for the hardware to, reallocate to write at a certain area of the disk, and to be able to quickly revert to that area to read. So there are 4 things I put down: connecting it to the right SATA port, SATA 3. Second, use command line programs such as this part for partitioning, and be able to use different functionality with that program to increase the performance. Use trim to optimize the space on solid state drive. And lastly, use tweaker utility to maximize the performance. Okay, so mostly software there. Any question?
Real quick, could you show the last part for number 18, please?
Sure. Yeah, so for 18, we talk about physical damage, damaged cable on the SATA drive, damaged host adapter, overheated hard disk, and overheated CPU and chipset.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, any questions? So this class is very close to CIS25. I took some of the content from CIS25 and I converted over to this. But CIS25 actually goes over more stuff, right? Printers, troubleshooting, a lot of different components. So if you're interested in getting the A+, you can take CIS25, or you can use the material for this class. Get a good review book. The selected textbook that I use is affordable, and it's also good. It has practice tests within, so you can use that to study for CompTIA A+. Now, as a student, you do get discount for CompTIA A+. So I think they take off like about $100 to $150 if you register yourself, and you can register with your student email. Once you're ready to sit for the test, you can make payments for the voucher, and then you can test it. I think now you can test remotely. Previously, I had proposed for the college to cover the A+ testing for the student, but we are unable to get the institution license. So as part of the funding, I cannot use the funding to buy vouchers for individuals. They did allow it in the past, but no longer in the last year. So what I'm doing is I'm buying an institution license with Certiport to test with Microsoft and other vendor for similar tests. So if you want to pursue that, right, after you take a certain course, you can also test for industry certification, so you can work. Okay? And that's essential in IT. We have to, keep our certification up in order to keep working in some cases. But for the A+, it lasts for 3 years, and then either you have continuation credit, or you retest, and every time you retest, you have to pay, of course. Yes, question, Sylvia?
Yes. Well, this is only for like a separate certification. For this class, do we get certification?
Yeah, so you have a state approved certificate, And that is a certificate stating that, you know, you completed the course, you gained this learning objectives, right? You're able to do this and this and this.
Right.
But that's going to be on your transcript. The certification that you also want to get if you want to do this professionally is the CompTIA A+ certification. I'll add a page on your if it's not already in the course resource.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's an industry certification. Basically, it's a standardized way of showing everybody that you're capable of doing this. Employers, you know, company, clients, stuff like that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll come back to this next week. So next week, I'm going to keep it really short. Okay, so we're not going to, we're going to touch on some of the concept material, and then I'm going to give you time to take the quiz. And so there might be a short quiz. I'm rethinking it now, but I want to give you a little bit of lab practice as well. So I'm going to try to put in some assignment for the 4 hours so you can do it. And so the way that they set the course up is at 11:59 on the 19th of September, which is next Saturday, the course is going to close. If I am allowed to extend it, usually it's to the next day. I cannot do it any longer than that, or they're going to start flagging it and they're going to, you know, communicate with me. So what I want to do is make sure that all our tasks are going to be in by that night so I can finalize my grade. And I need to submit the grade for this course within 3 business days following week while rolling the next class. So that way you would have your grade put into Web Advisor, and this course is pass or no pass. So if you have an A, right, based on the percentage, that's a pass. If you have a C, that's a pass. But anything below a C is a no pass. So if you have anything that's outstanding, this week is the time to get all of those to me, right? I'm flexible. If you add the course late, I'll regrade it. I won't penalize you. But if you miss a couple of things, you can turn it in. I'll grade it. Okay? All right. Any question? Let's talk about the lab now. So if you are on Canvas, I want you to click on the lab and follow along so that way you know what to do. And then I'll give you the rest of the time for this hour to finish your lab so you don't have to take an additional personal time with it. And don't forget that we have the hands-on project too, which you just go through and answer the questions that I stated. You can type in the answer. I realize that some students don't have access to Microsoft Office, but you can get it for free through school. However, if you can also type in the answer as text entry, I enable that, or you can download the document and type out the answer there. But go through and answer the questions as part 2. It's just asking you what you need to do and things like that. Okay, so don't forget about the project and the quiz. Okay, so in the module, you would see the week 3 lab. And this is a cloud lab environment. We use this a lot, especially for remote education, is that way you don't have to install crazy software, get that to work, because everybody's computer could be different. So when you click on the lab, look at the general instructions. It tells you to click the link to access Practice Lab, which is our cloud lab. You might have seen this before if you've taken IT classes with me, but if not, this is a good start. And during the week, sometimes Practice Lab does get a little busy, so it is a little slower than usual, but on the weekend when I test it, it's generally okay. So on the lab itself, there will be instruction pages on the left panel. You need to follow the instruction to the T. Otherwise, it is a self-grade lab. So if you miss something and you skip it, it won't give you the full score. When you completed everything, you need to click Done button. Okay. Now let's say that I got halfway through and I clicked Done. It's not going to give me 100% either. So what you need to do is when you get through all the tasks to the end, then you click Done. If you don't click done, it's going to give you partial credit as well. It's the way that it's programmed. Okay. So here we go. If you click on it and look at it along with me so you can see. So what they did is they bought a product that has exam preparation for certification along with exercises so student can learn. So with that, you can also have access to this product as long as you're in different courses, right? So now, sorry, I'm going to go back to my assessment real quick. So the first thing that you would see is that I have selected this module because I found that it's important to know how to do data backup and recovery, especially for yourself and your client. Okay, so if you're helping another person, it's good to know how. Okay, so when you get started, you don't need to watch this right now, but you can. You need to look at the tutorial video, which is like less than 4 minutes. It shows you how to use the basic in practice lab, like how to navigate. So at the top right here, right, are some of the buttons for practice lab. If you need to change settings, you would click on the wheel, the setting wheel. And in here, you don't have to fill out anything, but you can glide this to enable certain things. So for example, if I want the font to be larger so I can see, I can click settings and then change it to the larger font. Okay. So as I get older, I have a hard time seeing small fonts, so I would change that. But it would default to a certain size. So if you find it difficult to see, you can change the font size. Okay. There's additional accessibility capability here where you can slide it for advanced accessibility, and the information is noted there if you want to know what that is. If you have a hard time seeing lighter color or a low contrast color, you can also change it to high contrast so you can see. Okay. Now, on the top here is, it looks like a little drawer. So within this, you have the capability to select other things as well, but so you can find other things that you want to practice. I only required this one for the lab, so get through it first before you start playing with the other things. Okay. Here is, if you look at like the little sheet with the ribbon, it shows you the type of examinations that it would tie to, and that would tie to the new Core 1 and Core 2 and a little bit of Security Plus. So when you prepare for those certification, the industry certification, you have to know how to do this activity. So, so there's some information there, and you can click on it to look at it if you want. If you ever need technical help, you click on the question mark. And on there are documents on how to use Practice Lab. If you send them a service ticket, they usually get back to you via email 24 hours later. And they're generally good. I sent several service tickets last semester, and so they would get back to me and try to fix the problem. So for example, right, like you're trying to do something and it's not there, the button is not there or nothing is there to click, then you want to communicate with them, because there's nothing I can do on my end. If you like, you can let me know, and then I can also contact them. I do have direct connection to their supervisor and their director, so I can forward your message over, and so that, but they usually get back within 24 hours. So support, question, okay? Your instruction is the sheet. Okay, so you need to complete 6 things in this module. First, you need to perform a system backup. Then you are going to back it up to the cloud. Then you're going to learn about uninterrupted power supply and the use of surge protector. And then how to deal with difficult customer. And then when you're done, just click that. Okay. So ideally, they want you to spend 1 hour on this. So after I finish the general instruction, I'm going to let you do it. So that way it gives you time and not take additional personal time. So on the second page, so to go from the instruction to go from one page to another, you just click the next button next to the page number. Okay. And then that gets you to the second page, and then scroll down and read. So what they're telling you here is these are the virtual machines. They are operating system that's on a server that's connected to you via the internet. So virtual machine is good for testing, for lab environment, for doing a lot of different things, especially in security. We love it because it's a way that we can simulate the real world without impacting our computer system. So these are the virtual machines that they have, but you're only going to use one or the other. It's really easy. So after you check that out, the exercise 1 is gonna start on page 3. Okay, and it tells you that the device that you need is Win10. Okay, so in the middle on the panel, you need to select the proper Win. So you see there's Win810, there's Win10. So make sure we click the right one, otherwise you're gonna run into a problem. So Win10, put your cursor over it and click power on. Okay. Now, if you don't have good internet connection, sometimes practice lab will be spotty. But so we want to make sure that we connect steadily or use stable internet connection. So if it's not a good one to use with public Wi-Fi if it's spotty public Wi-Fi. Okay. So to begin exercise 1, you need to turn on Win10, even though the BDC01 is turned on. Now, if you need to restart it, there's a reboot button. If you want to reset everything, you can reset it. So when you do practice lab, it doesn't save, right? Like for example, if I do it for 30 minutes and I walk away from it, close it and walk away, it doesn't save your latest configuration. When you come back to it, you have to start all over again. Okay. Now, if you leave it on, it will still keep everything going. However, it would deplete your bandwidth, right? So we want to, if you want to sit down and do this, sit down and complete it so that way you don't have to think about it later. Okay. So turn on the Win10 and it will tell you which one it's going to be using. So pay attention to that. Okay. So that's your Win10. So when it goes through the task, it's going to tell you what to do on the left with the instruction. So now, where is this Win10, right? So once you have it on, if you click it, it's going to open another window or a side window. You can configure it. They show you how in the video. Here is the desktop for it. So we're using a desktop that we connect to via a browser. Okay, and this is our virtual machine that they created, and they simply have you remote connect to it. So 2 things that a lot of the students make mistake when they start using the cloud lab environment. If I have Windows 10 and I'm using Windows 10 virtual machine, here is my real Windows 10, which is on the bottom. Okay. And then another window opens up, which is a virtual machine. That's what you need. Because sometimes people start clicking on their regular Windows 10 and then the native Windows 10, and then they don't configure the virtual machine, and then they start running into a problem. So here is the virtual machine. So in here, it tells you to open up control panel. So you just simply do control panel, and it is a little laggy. I'm on Zoom and using it at the same time, so you see that it slows down. And the resolution for it's not the best, but because it's scaling out to your screen. So as you complete the step, you're going to complete it inside that window of the virtual machine. If you have pop-up blocker, you need to disable it, or it would ask you to allow that pop-up. You have to do that in order to access the virtual machine. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Mac OS or Windows or Linux. If you're using a browser with pop-up blocker, it might block this window and you won't be able to see it. Okay, so this is my take for giving you some hands-on without having you do a lot of stuff on your own computer, but you're still going to gain, you know, useful objectives from the lesson. Okay, so any question? Now, if you scale it to the right side, you can read the instruction and then do it, but I didn't, so I have to flip the screen back and forth. You can also use your tab feature to have the screen parallel so you can do it on both sides. Whatever that would be suitable for you. Okay, so it will walk you through the step. It tells you to go into system security, and then you're going to perform a backup inside that virtual machine. It's going to tell you where to do the backup. Okay, so simply these steps teaches you on how to create a backup on Windows 10. Okay, and where to put it. And when we back up, we always wanted to back it up to another location, not that system, right? Or another drive. Pay attention to the password. Make sure that you issue the right password. After you create, so when you do a backup, you create a system image which captures everything, including the operating system, like Windows 10, right, or Windows 7, and then all the applications that's in that system that's installed. So what you need is you need to make an image as part of the backup. And when I teach security, I tell my students, sometimes it takes you, let's say, an hour to do a backup. But when you recover from that backup file, it would take a lot longer, because if you ever go through the recovery process, it's sometimes twice or 3 times, 4 times as long. So you need to reserve time for that. It's great fast to do a backup. So on a simple system like a desktop or a laptop, but on a server scale, when you have to back up a lot of different files, you know, that's within that server, that would take longer. So it teaches you how to create a system image backup, and it would have a specific file type, okay? And the only way that we can unpack that backup is to go through the recovery process, okay? And that's the same with all software tools for all different OSs. When you make a backup, in order to read it, you have to use the tool to open it up and see what's in it. So now, after you completed your backup, okay, you go through the step, continue to go through each step. Don't skip anything, okay? And then when it tells you to take a screenshot, just click the button, and then it would capture the actual screen from your virtual machine. Okay? So here it shows you in exercise 2 how to create a backup on cloud storage, okay? And I want you to do it so you have the first-hand experience. So use the cloud backup storage, because if you store it on there, then you can later retrieve it, so that way you can you know, recover from it. Okay. What if your drive fail, right? What if you can't connect your drive? But cloud backup needs internet connection, and that's what we need. So sometime when we recover the system, we might not have internet connection, so you have to download it to a drive maybe, and then be able to go from there. Okay, so that's the downside about cloud. So they show you how you can back it up to one drive. So after this exercise, these exercises, you should look at the practice and implement it for your personal use, because that's important. That's the whole point in this, is to improve right, your technical skills so you can improve your personal usage with computer. Okay. So the step walks you through on how to sync your OneDrive, how to be able to get your backup to the OneDrive. So that's exercise 2. Exercise 3, we're gonna recover from that. After we store it on the cloud, we're gonna pull that backup image and be able to recover it. So we put everything back. So the simple case, right? Let's say that I have a malware that wipes out everything on my system, but if I did the backup the day before, I can go back to it, pull it from the cloud, and put everything back to the way it was. I might lose a little bit of data for that current day, but from the previous day, I have everything in place. So we can recover. Or if my system crashed, if my drive failed that day, I can get another drive, physically install it, configure it, and then put the image back. So it's kind of like on your laptop, you revert it back to the manufacturer. That's a backup. That's an image that's created on that drive. So you can go back to the original settings and the applications and everything you need. Okay. So it teaches you on how to do the recovery in exercise 3. And then after that, right, here in this portion, it just talks a little bit about uninterrupted power supply, which is a large battery that you can use in case power goes out. Everything we use require power, PC, server, printer, you know. So we want to have this thing connected to our essential system, so in case it goes out, our system's still running. Businesses do this. Data center will have it. Sometimes they'll have a generator, right? Whether it's diesel or solar, to generate power to supply for the rest of the day. Now, uninterrupted power supply will only last for at most a couple of hours, between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Think of it like a car battery. That's about the size. Okay, it could be big or bulky. However, it all depends. Okay, so you want temporary power for your system, and that would be a good thing to have, while UPS can be expensive. And battery does go bad over time, so you have to replace a UPS every so often. Okay, so for business, we would check maybe like 3 or 5 years we have to replace it. Depends on how often they charge it, how they use it, etc. So when power goes out, we would use a UPS. So in the case of disaster where we have no power connection, we would have that. Using Surge Protector. Okay. So just read through this for the exercise 5, and it talks about, the importance of Surge Protector, why should we use Surge for big surge to regulate the current. Okay. And then lastly, in our world, we deal with difficult people because people are upset that their system stopped working, they lose time, they lose money, right? And on the customer service end, how to deal with customer, right? Things we don't argue, we have to listen. We don't dismiss their problems, we write it down, right? We don't judge, okay? And we don't disclose over social media because we have to keep privacy. We want to be culturally sensitive. We don't want to, discriminate anyone. We want to avoid distractions. So if the phone is ringing and somebody is screaming at you because their printer stopped working, you listen. And then, maybe someone else will pick up the phone. So you deal with the customer at hand. Okay. And also your email is going off. So there could be a lot of different things happening simultaneously in the tech world. However, we want to avoid distractions and give them the attention. And then sometimes when you try to explain the solution to the customer, if it's highly technical, they're going to be upset. So If you can break it down to very simple layman terms as much as you can, but you want to educate them to do the right thing. So, but make sure that we communicate clearly, because you know, just like how when I explain to you what this is, we want to define it. Also, because they don't know a lot of the terminology in the acronym. Okay, so this kind of gives you a little bit about technical customer service. And IT is a very difficult area to staff. It's hard to find the right personality, the right service. A lot of the people in IT, they make a decent amount of salary and then they go to a different company to make more money. So it's hard to keep them. So this is why, you know, if you have great skills with people, you have great technical skills, it's pretty likely, there's likely chance that you will find decent work in this field. Okay. So once you go through the exercises on the pages, answer the lab assessment questions. Okay. And then submit the report and then click done. And that will be for the lab. Okay. Any question as far as practice lab?
I was just curious for the first exercise. Is that a Windows 7 computer in a Windows 7 virtual machine inside a Windows 10 virtual machine?
No, they did a Windows 7 license with an upgrade to Windows 10. That's why it's originally it was Windows 7. And then you know how Microsoft released a few years ago when you can upgrade it to Windows 10? So if you already have the license for 7, you have an automatically free upgrade. That's why it shows Windows 7 in the back like that. Okay, other questions? Okay, so I'm going to give you time to work on this individually, because if I'm on Zoom, then it's going to take up your bandwidth. When you're done, click done and it automatically sends the grade. When you look at your grade book on Canvas, if it's giving you any other than 100% when you completed everything, let me know, okay? And then I will manually fix it. But make sure that you complete it, because I can check your report on Practice Lab and I can see how far you are where you left off. It gives me that capability, okay? Other questions? Yeah, so Juan put down Bitfender and Kaspersky. You know, Bitdefender is a little bit resource hungry for me, so you know, but there are other tools. You can use Komodo, you can use, there's so many different anti-malware tools. So that's for the security class, which is 824C. And then, but for A+, you need to know about malware as well. Okay? Questions? Okay, so just to be sure, type in your name in the chat in case you use a nickname to sign up for Zoom. I'm gonna end the session 30 minutes early so you can finish your lab and work on any assignments that you need to work on. Send me an email if you have questions. I did answer some of the posted questions. Videos will go up. For 4 hours video takes a little bit for me to get it to YouTube and also from Zoom, but I will share that. Okay. All right. I wish you a wonderful weekend, and I will see you here for this class the last time next week. And then, you know, if you miss any questions, now is the time to ask. No questions? Okay, we'll finish up week 3 and then we'll get into OS next week. Okay, don't forget about the project and the quiz. Have a good weekend, everybody. Work on your lab and assignments.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Bye.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, interpreters. You're the greatest. Sarah, that's fine. Any other questions? Yeah, you can send me an email or have any questions. Jessica, you have any question? No question, Jessica? Okay, I'm gonna sign off so you can work on your lab, okay? All right. If you have any questions, send me an email. Take care.